we're recording. So, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us at today's Fireside chat. We're going to have an open Q&A session kind of following this where people can sort of like tag in and ask questions. But for right now, I figured we would just kind of do a closed session recording. I have some questions to ask. The whole reason I thought of you around this subject, the subject is, of course, does this even need blockchain? And the reason I thought about you was because that was literally what you kicked every advisory session off with at ETH Denver. And I think it was one of the most helpful things to get people to actually think through. So Kevin, before we kind of jump into these questions, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what your background is, and sort of like how.
Sure. So yeah, I've been in the space for about years now, maybe a little less than that, but around there. I was doing web dev before. And then I started the Ethereum Boulder meetup in Boulder, Colorado. Became friends with Kevin Seagraves, the founder of Gitcoin. He and I kicked some ideas around initially for that, and then co-authored some of the original smart contracts and did a hackathon, that sort of stuff. And then eventually he went off and started Gitcoin, and I went and worked for the Boston Consulting Group, Digital Ventures. So I was a blockchain engineer and consultant for about a year, designing projects, designing ventures, writing POCs, and basically like presenting to C-suite type people about blockchain. And then I left that and came and worked at Gitcoin most recently, and built the Gitcoin grants product, which now has done over $50,000, I think, in the first couple months of the year. And you know, we've been doing constrained liberal radicalism, which is a mechanism designed by Vitalik and Glenn Weil. So a bunch of cool stuff there. And then I helped organize the Ethereum or ETH security group, which is the security group in the Ethereum ecosystem. Currently, I'm at a project called 55 Foundry out in Los Angeles, and we're working on decentralized ventures of a similar thing. Yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. So a lot of, I think especially with the protocol piece, right? And especially with the Gitcoin piece, a lot of work within, I think like just the blockchain and considering how it applies to digital products, which I think is kind of what accounts for like some of the interesting ways in which you sort of approach it. So I'm just going to cut to the point, Kevin, and say like, how should teams evaluate whether or not their project even needs a blockchain?
Sure. I mean, I think first of all, it's good to have like a common understanding of what a blockchain or a decentralized system is. And the way I define it is that it's just a coordination tool that allows users to trust the system instead of each. And then from that, you get a number of benefits and kind of angles at which to address the question. And so I usually approach the question in a number of different lenses. And then once I have those lenses, then I can approach each idea and kind of like, you know, does it check the box or not? And so the first one is, let's see, I wrote it down. I'm blinking. The first one is there a large trust function at play, right? So do your actors not trust each other? And would they benefit from trusting a system instead? And then, so for an example, you can look at Gitcoin and the bounty product. And so basically it's why Gitcoin uses is blockchain is for the escrow service that you can write into a smart contract. And the easy, like, yes, you could do that in the traditional fiat world, but there'd be a whole lot of red tape and it'd be really slow. And like, it's just easier to write it in a smart contract. And there's some benefits around like payments and settlements and stuff like that, but it's generally around that. People trust each other, whether the payment is going to be there when the work is performed or not. And then from that, you can also think about like, are there intermediaries that can be automated? Mm-hmm. So generally intermediaries play a trust role inside of an ecosystem. and or maybe they're not even trusted, but they found a way to get themselves in between that, where they transfer information or goods or value from one place to the other, which can now be automated through software. And you don't necessarily need blockchain and decentralization from that. But generally, especially when the intermediary is acting as a trusted party, you can now like automate that whole flow. And then the third question I ask is the industry hesitant to make a startup? So this is more like a business minded question, where like, yeah, you could have a great solution that minimizes trust between actors. And let's like take like healthcare as an example of like a gigantic industry, right? Like you could have a platform where all of these actors would benefit from a shared data space and decentralizing information and power. But if a startup comes to them and does that, then all of these industry bodies are going to basically be giving away a bunch of value and power. And if instead of, and they don't want to king make, they don't want to like basically give that to a startup. But if you can decentralize that idea of the startup and make these industry players all co-owners of that industry body, maybe it's a startup itself, it's probably a foundation, but it's kind of a different sort of take on decentralization. But when you do that, the industry actors are much more likely to participate and actually make the whole system work. So those are my three questions. Like, is there a big trust function? Are there intermediaries? And is there an avenue that that the industry doesn't want to king make? And is there an avenue to bring all those players to the table?
Right. I love that. Out of curiosity, I think that's like I think those three questions is a really great way to sort of be like a forcing function to the ideas and like how you're kind of thinking through like a potential product. I'm wondering, are there even, because you've said like there were a couple of words that you ended up repeating like in the answer. I'm wondering, are there keywords that you think of when they're used in the industry that kind of point to an opportunity in blockchain, like reconciliation or something like that, where you're kind of keying in saying like there might be like an intermediary play here or something like that?
I'm trying to think of like examples of where I would get keywords, or I don't know. Generally, I just find that there's like a certain smell where you're like, that sounds like an intermediary. Like that sounds like it's right for decentralization, or it's kind of like, a data market is a good example where getting people to trust each other with their data and like having a proper valuation of that data and sharing it, like that lends itself very much towards decentralization. I don't know if I have any good examples of like keywords that like clue you into decentralization. I think in general, like if you're thinking about creating a project at a hackathon, like you first have to, like, before you even ask those questions that I talked about earlier, you have to ask like, well, what are my goals with this hackathon? Because whatever project you try to create or address, it all depends on what your ultimate goals are. Like if you're just trying to learn some of the tools of the ecosystem, like you could build the equivalent of a to-do list, right? Whatever that is in Ethereum. Or if you're trying to get hired, like there's certain things, you're not trying to recreate the wheel, just demonstrate that you're able to execute. If you're trying to create a business and like really think up something new, which is more towards what you're talking about here, then it's like, thinking about the industry and the larger play and all the actors and what's your go-to-market and those sorts of questions. And so, there's a lot of people trying to attend hackathons, and so it's really asking yourself, what am I here for? What am I trying to do?
Sorry, go for it.
I was just gonna say, like, if you're just trying to learn, then you ask yourself a different set of questions along the way.
And that's sort of, I'm going to jump down the question list a little bit because that sort of segues really naturally into something I was wondering, which is, like to me, like another thing, right? Another part of this is networking. It's finding teammates that you may want to build something with in the future. And so I'm kind of curious as far as what is your, like what's your perspective when you're thinking through, once you've answered that question, what do I want to get out of this hackathon? And if it is like build a business, or at least like find people to build a business with, like how do you approach like evaluating teams and evaluating projects? So like, let's say that you have the time, you have the skills, but you don't necessarily have like that idea to jump into. Like, how do you do that? What's your approach for that?
Yeah. So we're assuming that you have time, you have skills, but you don't have teammates, or you don't have and you don't have the idea.
Yeah.
Is that right? So, I mean, I think.
Yeah. So like we're in the matchmaking phase right now, actually. I think there's actually like I think they're actually have a matchmaking meeting going on right now.
Sure. I mean, so finding people that are also knowledgeable and capable, like, of course, it's like, again, a more obvious one. But also finding people that have skills that are complementary to yourself and cover your blind spots is super valuable. So like if you have design skills, like maybe it's good to find a designer who at least knows the principles of decentralization. Like it does matter what your app looks like. Like people care. As an engineer, like it's not something I want to deal with. So making friends with the designer is always good. It's also like, in general, when I like try to make friends, that's essentially what you're doing, right? I try to find people that I want to be more like. And so finding people that like, I want to be more like this person, and just like having conversations talking about who you are, what you do, what your dreams are, what you're most proud of, what's most exciting to you. Asking those more personal questions gets you into like, do I want to spend time with this person? And if I were to start a company, would I want to sit next to them every day? Like maybe those are bigger questions than maybe for a hackathon team. Like, okay, I spend a weekend with this person and we build something cool. If that's your goal, then like that's great. But if you're trying to like start a company, then those more serious questions come into play.
That totally makes sense. And I love the idea of like, in a lot of ways, I've seen it, right? Like this idea of like founder dating, because like it is in a lot of ways, especially if you're starting a company, it is a marriage basically. Like you see them sometimes more often than you see your partner. so it's definitely things that you need to consider for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like that a lot. So I'm going to kind of like circle back to something you were talking about earlier, as far as, I guess like application for blockchains, right? Like a lot of something that you hear a whole lot whenever you are discussing like kind of brand new ideas for products, especially when you're trying to get people to adopt new behaviors where existing solutions exist, is this idea of like 10x value, or 10x ease. And I'm kind of curious, like, where do you see, like you kind of like, you have these, you have this list of questions to sort of push each idea through as like a gating function. Are there sort of some concepts, or are there some concepts that you have around where blockchain is especially suited to provide, capture either 10x value or in some mysterious case, 10x ease?
Yeah. Well, if we look at like Bitcoin and Ethereum in general, like where did they provide 10x value, or a blockchain in general? Like Bitcoin specifically basically created this new way for us to transfer, send, receive, and store value without an intermediary, without a bank, without the entire legacy financial system, which is like a ginormous X value. Like we can't even put a number on it. The ease of that is like, it's super hard. But that value add is just so great that it's, it's spun up this huge hype in industry at this point. Ethereum specifically now allows you to add additional logic to that transfer and storage of value. And along with that additional logic for transferring value, you can create unique digital assets and digital twins, and you can create logic around transferring those. And so that's certainly a 10x value add, and it's also like a ginormous X value add. The ease is, it's not there, but the ease is that you can do it at all, right?
Right.
Was before it was a totally non-existent, but the possibility didn't even exist.
Right. Which is like kind of that's the next question, right? Is even like what can exist now that could not exist previously? And I think that's just like you're kind of saying, like unmediated cooperation is one aspect. Are there kind of others that you're thinking of, or is that kind of like the big primary value add you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly the main value add.
I mean, it's a big value add. Like it's kind of a big deal. It's a lot, right?
Right. Well, but now we have this unmediated value, or unmediated. What did you say?
Coordination. It's like unmediated like coordination layer is kind of how I look at it.
Right. It's a coordination tool.
Yeah.
And so we've had this huge growth in that value, but we don't have the user experience. Like it's still, that's where the 10x and ease is still, it's still there to catch up. And so I would look at, if I'm looking at a company, it's like, okay, well, how do I make this ginormous X value that we've now created accessible and easy to use, because it's not right now. And I think that's like where the industry is generally like pointing towards, is like, okay, we at least have a roadmap to get to where it scales and it's privacy first and like all these different things, but nobody can use it. So we need to create those systems.
I kind of a follow-on question, because I saw I think within the first 3 weeks of working in blockchain, someone sent me, they said it was like the holy trinity of blockchain solutions. And then I don't know why they called it a trinity, because it was a triangle, and at the top it said scalability, and on one side it said security, and then on the other side it said usability, and then it said pick two. Yeah. Like, do you kind of see that as, I guess, do you see this as a solvable triangle, or do you think that solutions are always going to have to be making a choice between security, usability, and scalability?
I think there's always going to be trade-offs. It matters on what your use case is. Most users don't care. Like, they don't care about having a wallet. They don't want to know what a private public key is. It's too much for them. They're gonna lose it, or it's just gonna stop them from using it at all. And so like managing that for people is probably an all right business decision. As long as you always provide the option to go fully decentralized, that's great. But generally, like, making that compromise, it's now less secure from like a personal use standpoint, but you're gaining the UX, and like the option for that personal security is always there. But now the user is making that trade-off. Like, I want the security and not the usability. So it's stuff like that.
Could you kind of expand on how decentralization like plays into that trifecta? Like, does decentralization skew to one side of that triangle to the other?
Yeah, decentralization definitely skews towards security, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And so the more decentralized it is, generally, the more secure it is, the slower it is, and the poor user experience. And if you try to go towards scalability, you generally lose security, because you're making concessions towards like at least in the Ethereum blockchain, you have the miners have to, if you're trying to go for scale and transaction volume, they have to, it's the amount of time for somebody to take transactions out of the pool, bundle it into a block, that block propagates around the network, like, and how fast is like that those communications happen. And if you increase that, you increase the attack surface for 51% attacks and all this other stuff, right? And if you're going towards usability, generally you're like abstracting away security, and you maybe you don't care as much about scalability, because you can like do some layer 2 stuff, or you can do it more centralized database, and you're just like throwing a couple things onto the blockchain when needed. So it's all different trade-offs.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'll include it in the show notes. There was a good podcast with, I think it's Igor and then Austin Griffith about Bridge and XDAI. And Austin was playing around on the Brenner Wallet piece, at least like 5 months ago. He's talking about like progressive decentralization. So this idea that like as more and more value is stored, you start pushing them more and more towards like a decentralized like the C phrase and security essentially. But like once you basically make the on-ramp into crypto a lot more gradual, and let them sort of play with an exchange of value that is like, they wouldn't feel tore up necessarily like if they lost, right? Like if like
Right.
$3 or $5 or whatever. But once you actually started storing real value on there, you started encouraging them towards that like actual decentralization and towards like the self-managing of your security, which I think was an interesting idea. I've kind of been thinking about a lot, thinking through some of my own projects. I like that. Is there a good way? I think one of the things that you don't have a ton of time whenever you're in a hackathon to evaluate a project. I wonder, are there kind of some, I guess, like some shortcuts in your mind around evaluating whether or not a traditional database, a blockchain, or even like something that I don't think enough about is considering like consortium blockchains instead of just like going like full on chain. Are there like 80-20 rules or like characteristics of projects that you sort of see around that, where they can evaluate and like quickly slot these ideas into one or the other?
Well, it depends on who you're trying, what your trust function is, right?
Right.
And so like, is a single company wanting to make sure its data is not tampered by its employees, right? That'd be like a centralized blockchain, right? Like a proof of authority or something like that. And then a consortium chain would be, do these companies want to have a shared data space, but they don't trust each other to not manipulate the data once it's in the database.
Right.
And then the public chain is like, well, does the user trust either the company or the consortium of companies to not manipulate the data, right? Because as a proof of, if you have like just a centralized chain running proof of authority, like they could just write whatever they want in the blockchain. If it's a consortium, they could all collude and write whatever they want to the blockchain. And so if it's the full public net, then the user has the protection. So that's generally how I think about it. It's like, depends on your use case and what you're trying to accomplish and who's trusting whom and that sort of thing.
Nice. I like that. Also props for the, I assume the proper use of whom.
I just threw that M in there,
That was good, man. I like that. Do you have like a mental flowchart when evaluating projects to determine when a blockchain is best? Or do you, I guess like I'm curious as far as like, because you are like, just in, I've known you've like kind of got like one of the most dynamic minds as far as like coming up with ideas, being really interested in them and like kind of wanting to move forward with them. What do you start with? Do you start with the idea first and then like run it through the blockchain litmus? Or do you start with blockchain first and like an industry and then drive towards that idea? Like which direction do you sort of approach it in? Or can it be either one?
Well, I think I usually approach it with the, I think it's like, am I excited about the idea or not? Yeah. My lens of the world tends to come from the blockchain decentralized lens, because that's where I've been the last couple of years. And it's like, is there a there? Right? Like, do I care? Would others care? Would this be exciting to work on for the next 5 to 10 years? And maybe it's not even that last question. It's like, is it exciting right now? And I start there, and then it's like, okay, well, now let's like put it through some scrutiny. First of all, let's ask, does it need blockchain? So like, is there a trust function involved? And are there any intermediaries? And those are the easy questions to ask. Sometimes you have to just like walk down the path far enough. And then you realize like, oh, like yeah, this doesn't, like, I thought it needed blockchain, but now I realize it doesn't. And that's totally fine. Like, blockchain companies are just software companies. Like, this is all, we're not special. Uh, we're just early to this game.
Right.
Maybe we're special because we're like using crazy internet money that is a new thing, but it's just software. And so whether if you find out that your company doesn't need blockchain, but it's still a good idea, then it's still a good idea. And so yeah, it's like, is it exciting? And then I run it through the, like, does it need blockchain? And ultimately the question is always, like, is there a there? Do I care? Do others? Does that answer your question?
It totally does. The only thing I'd ask is if you push this definition, because I think you and I say the there thing a lot, but I'm not sure if other people do. So could you, like, kind of push that definition of there a little bit further just for everyone else?
Sure. So the idea of, or the question, is there a there? Is the idea that it's like, does this idea have teeth? Which that is also like an abstract idea. But does it create value for all parties involved? And is it, does it have a hypothesis that is testable? Does it have a logical end goal? Yeah, like, can it make money? Is it the right time? I mean, now I'm getting more into, like, the like, what do you look at in a startup, right? Like, is it the right time? Who are the founders? Can they raise money, right? That's, like, generally how you look at startups and startups, right? So I look at that in myself. Like, is it the right time for this idea? What is the correct tech for this idea? Does it need blockchain? Does it not? Is it me, or who is it? And what does the team look like? What are their connections? What is their network? What's their charisma level? What's their ability to raise money? And that's how you find out, like, is there a there? Yeah, it's a good idea. It's a good team. They can raise money. Like, there's probably a there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was kind of making that up as I went, but
I love that. I think the only thing I would add to that, if I'm allowed to add to your list, is the unfair advantage to the team, right? Like, I think that, like, ideas are so, like, you kind of see the same idea pop up spontaneously across a couple of different people. And I think especially since we're all kind of in the same bubble, crypto bubble / like tech bubble / like Twitterverse sort of thing, that you're kind of rearranging ideas. Everyone's working with the same primitives. And so you're kind of finding the same unique rearrangements of those idea primitives. And so to me, a big part of it is looking at the team that you're building, or the team that you've got within that, and understanding, why is this team positioned to be successful in execution and bringing it in delivery to market, whereas, like, the hypothetical for other teams that are working on it. So, like, what are, like, the weird, unique advantages that you've got? That'd be the only thing that I add. I really like that answer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, yeah, what's your right to win?
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I'm coming up towards the end. I think the last question I've got, and then I'll open it up to anyone else for questions. But the only other question I have is, like, what other advice do you have for hackathon participants, man?
Yeah. I mean, I think I spoke a little bit to it earlier, but it's all about the people you meet, right? Like, it's not necessarily about the project you create in this one hackathon. Like, if it's only a couple days, or even if it's online for like a month or whatever, it's generally who you meet and who you talk to. And then short of that, it's like, can you demonstrate knowledge and the ability to execute? And if you can demonstrate that ability, you can communicate well, people like spending time with you, like, you're either going to get a job or you're going to find somebody to create something with. And, like, that's ultimately what these hackathons are about. Like, it's building stuff and meeting people and getting hired, right?
I love that. That's really great. Gonna turn it over to the floor. Is there anyone else who kind of wants to chime in and ask some questions, or do you feel like you covered everything? Because that was pretty extensive.
Yeah, I actually have a question. This is Gabriel on the labs team. I'm curious, like, first of all, I love your 3 kind of questions rubric of, does this need a blockchain? I think that's really helpful, even like for me coming into this ecosystem. I spent a lot of time trying to kill companies that I was like, why the fuck is this a blockchain company? I don't. So I love kind of your tech list. Something that keeps baffling me, and you seem like the perfect person to answer this question. Why are we not seeing more blockchain companies in payments processing, right? Like this is the slowest, most outdated, old legacy financial system that I can think of. The fact that like it still takes 3 to 5 business days for funds to transfer or clear from account to account, like even with as slow as blockchain is, seems like it's like in the principle of 10x better. Seems like we would see more companies that are starting to make inroads in payment processing, even in small niche markets. And for the life of me, I can't figure out like why we're not seeing more companies in that ecosystem. Is there something that I'm missing or misunderstanding about blockchain or the core technology that doesn't make it a good candidate for payment processing?
I think it's a usability problem. The fact that like, you have 2 different worlds, right? You've got like your legacy world and your new world, and like not like let alone payments, just crossing over and like participating in either world. It's really fucking hard. And then once you're across the side, like there's multiple problems. There's like the getting across problem. That's the first one, and then the second one, then you have all the problems making all the payments, and then you make all those payments, and then getting back across is like, again, a third hurdle to jump. And so I think it's definitely you've clued into a big pain point, but the tech I think is there. Like, yeah, there's some scalability issues, that kind of thing. I'm sure the banks are working real hard on this one, but I think it's just really painful to use. Yeah, like I was a Sherpa for somebody recently, and going through the process of like, okay, let's buy a CryptoKitty, and they had never used blockchain, but we like went through and downloaded MetaMask, and like we went to Coinbase, and we like did the whole identity thing, and we got the Ether, and then we like sent it to the MetaMask, and we went to MetaMask, and all this stuff, and it only really worked. We only did it in 2 hours because I had enough ETH to just send to them, because Coinbase wanted to wait 18 days to give them their Ether. And so it's like, because I was a Sherpa, knew all the steps in the process is what they actually needed, and I had the Ether to like front them basically where we actually able to do it. That's a super painful process, right? Like,
oh yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of one of the companies in our portfolio, Civil. They did their token launch back in November, December, I think it was, and then they relaunched the token membership recently. I think March, when they relaunched. They got the process down from a very cumbersome 44 steps to 30 odd steps or so, right? Which is like a 28% improvement. So like kudos, and that's great, but still a very difficult process. And so like, I guess you're right. The usability issue is still the main issue with the technology, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you bullish on any protocols that are currently working to fix that, like Wire, or I'm trying to think, any MakerDAO is kind of like experimenting with some interesting onboarding Onramps?
I haven't done too much like survey of the ecosystem for people who are solving that issue, so I don't have a good answer. But like, I think it's you pointed it out. It's a fairly obvious payments, like duh, like okay, everybody in this entire ecosystem is going to need money and like to send and receive value, and someone's got to solve that problem. So I'm sure some people are working on it. I just don't know who.
Gotcha. Cool. Are there?
I have a super off the wall question. If you don't care, like I think about this a lot.
Sure.
When do you think we're gonna get to the point where, like, I especially think about some of the work that Austin's doing with burner wallets, right? Which I think is a really cool use case. How far away do you think we are from IoT and like connected devices having wallets? Like, when will my refrigerator have a burner wallet that can send to Amazon to restock my groceries? How far away are we really?
Well, your refrigerator won't have a burner wallet. It'll have maybe some derivation of it, but like right now the burner wallet just stores like private keys in like a browser. And so it's like super not safe, and it's like someone would probably swipe all the refrigerators in America and like make a bunch of money, right? Like it would happen because it's all going to be written in JavaScript and like totally insecure. And but when will your refrigerator have a wallet and just send it to Amazon? Well, we have to solve scalability. And we'll have to like integrate this new crypto world into the more legacy world. And I don't even know if that problem, you probably don't even need blockchain for that. Like why would your refrigerator need, like, who's trusting whom there? Like your refrigerator probably just needs to like have access to, through Plaid, like have access to your bank account, and it can transfer money on your behalf, or maybe you set like some limit, your refrigerator only gets like a $50 limit per month or whatever. And
you assume I trust my refrigerator.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, but maybe you have like a proxy pattern, but I don't know why you need crypto for that solution.
God, I love that you are on this call. That's exactly what you were brought on for, right? Like, why the fuck is that a blockchain solution? That's so true. So right.
Yeah. I love it. Katie, Jake, any follow-ups? I'm getting a no. I'm good from Katie.
Yeah, I have a question. I guess just Kevin, like from your experience being around hackathons, working in hackathons, is there like a particularly memorable moment of a time when you saw a team pivot or your team pivoted, and like just sort of like what the catalyst was for that and how you guys knew that you needed to pivot?
I mean, when I've gone into hackathons, I mean, I'm sure I've pivoted before. Usually it's just like cutting back features. My most memorable hackathons, we just executed on our idea, which was awesome because we came in with a really simple, small idea that we wanted to execute very well. And it's kind of like that it's that principle. You do one thing really well, and that's it. So that's like a piece of advice. But witnessing somebody pivot was probably this last year at ETH Denver, when I was actually in a workshop with Zach and Katie, and we were talking about doing research data. I think Zach was in this conversation with me.
Yeah. It was molecules, right? Like based off of research papers or something like that. It was an inventory.
Yeah. And originally the guy's idea is like, yeah, I just want like to basically save time doing research because these are all in an inventory somewhere. And we were like, yeah, but that's like, you can just do that with a database. Like, you're not trusting anybody. Like, yeah, maybe you're trusting people to not change your molecular data, but like someone's going to notice that and then just change it back. Like, you don't really need blockchain. But then it's asking the questions like, okay, well, what in that ecosystem like does require trust, and or where is there like a big pain point? And I think we eventually got to the idea of it was basically like in software, there's kind of the idea of like, if I write software and your product is dependent on mine, like I should probably get some decay back to me in value. And so it'd be a similar thing where you're not necessarily posting your information as soon as you can in order to publish and like not get scooped, but it's when you publish your paper, when your paper is cited, and that knowledge was used to produce like a pharmaceutical or some other treatment, you could basically derive that back to the original producer of knowledge, and that was it was a much wider, broader idea, but it became actually applicable to blockchain. Was that kind of it, Zach, or was it?
It was, and I think the thing that was like I remember that moment where they stumbled on that idea, and we both looked at them and we looked at each other. We were like, "That's definitely a blockchain idea." And it was value was derived to the original researcher, but it was also incentivizing peer review, which is currently not at all. It is not at all incentivized, and nobody does.
That was a big idea.
It's a deeply broken system, and so the idea that like if you peer reviewed studies, you were given part of the credit of the trickle down profits that they were based off of, and we were just like, oh my god, this is what needs to happen with research. This is amazing, and I think they like went on to like actually hack on that. It was a fantastic moment. I think like
it was the peer review. Because it was like, oh, this is an issue that not many people think about, but is actually super important to research and like all of our daily lives actually, but we just never see it. It's so abstracted down to the like creation of knowledge tree that we're never exposed to it.
Yeah. That was definitely one of my favorite memories at a hackathon as well. That was so cool to see them sort of like it was almost like you had this big beautiful idea that we realized was kind of worthless, and they turned it on its head, and suddenly you're just like, oh, that's actually really valuable. That's fantastic. It was so much fun. All right, if that is it, we're running a little bit over. Kevin, thank you so much for sticking around and going over the a lot of time, man. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me, everybody.
Again, thanks everyone for showing up, and we're going to be posting this soon, and we will have an open Q&A channel. Join the Discord if you've got questions, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks everybody.
Yes, bye.